Hey, Troy, we're ready to go whenever you guys are.
Okay, let's start in 30 seconds, Andy.
Okay, we're set.
Hello, and welcome to the CSBA webinar, Saved by the Bell, Emergency Response in California Public Schools. No one likes to think about the worst case scenario or what could happen when crisis strikes. But it's essential that we confront these ideas because as education leaders, we have a responsibility to make sure that our school communities are prepared if and when disaster strikes. So in today's webinar, we have with us the Office of Emergency Services for the state of California, and they will review the 3 R's of disaster situations: readiness, response, and recovery. And we'll talk about several major forms of crisis or disaster you might be faced with in a school setting and give you the skills to help cope with those situations. Today's presenters are Mark Ghilarducci, the Director of the Office of Emergency Services, Tom Osborne, the OES Deputy Director of Homeland Security, and Don O'Keefe, OES Chief of Law Enforcement. I'm Troy Flint, Chief Information Officer with the California School Boards Association, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get into the heart of today's webinar, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping details, specifically how you at home or in the office can participate in today's webinar. We ask that you hold your questions until the end of the panelist discussion, which should take roughly 1 hour. However, you can submit your questions virtually during the panelist discussion, and we will include them in the Q&A in about 1 hour from now. You can see in the graphic there, if you're looking at the screen, there is a Q&A icon there at the bottom of the screen. Click on that icon, type your question into the box that appears the same way as you would a text or chat message, but be sure that you're using the Q&A icon, not the chat icon. If you use the Q&A icon, our team behind the scenes will gather those questions. We will get to as many as we can and present them to our panelists later in the session. So with no further ado, let's get down to the subject matter. So panelists, our first webinar question is trying to set the framework for where schools fit in to this larger Cal standardized emergency management system. Some of our listeners may not even be aware that there is a Cal standardized emergency management system and how it interacts with schools. So could you talk a little bit about what the school role is in the larger overall system?
Well, thanks, Troy, and good morning to everyone. Mark Ghilarducci, and happy to be with you today. With regards to the California Standardized Emergency Management System, first of all, disaster and emergency planning is one of the many components that the state mandates for schools, part of the comprehensive school safety plan. It's in the California Education Code. Each school in the state is considered part of local government. In essence, they're a special district with regards to or within the state structure of government. Since all disasters are generally local, they start at a local level, in this case, an event that would be impacting a school. And because schools are part of considered as a special district, as part of the state system, they are subject to the requirements of participating in the standardized emergency management system. That means that that each local school district would coordinate issues with their city and then their county operational area. We call them operational areas. It's the first line of coordination amongst agencies during disasters. And an operational area represents the resources of the county. An operational area is managed by the County Office of Emergency Services or Emergency Management. And that is the first portal that a school district has to enter into the standardized emergency management system from the standpoint of an operational area, then going to the region levels, which a region constitutes a number of operational areas. And that regional coordinator typically is a state OES coordinating at the regional operations center, can provide resources to that school district from throughout the region. If the event is bigger than what a region can handle with resources or capabilities or technical expertise, then they can go to the state level, which is here at OES headquarters in Sacramento. And we have the ability to go throughout the state to all the regions and operational areas of the state to be able to provide resources to that particular school district. That also opens up a portal to the federal government in being able to get federal assistance. So that standardized system can consist of common terminology. It's based upon incident command system, and it's predicated upon a series of planning, training, and exercises that it is expected that all schools and school districts utilize and participate in to make sure that they are part of that. It is in statute, so it's a mandated in statute to be able to operate within the SEMS, what we call it, Standardized Emergency Management System. But it also is critical to understand the system so that when you need assistance, there is a coordinated, systematic way of being able to get that assistance in a timely and efficient way.
Great. Thank you. I think that gives us a comprehensive overview of the emergency management system and where schools would fit in. The second question was going to explore the division of labor and responsibility at the local, county, and regional level, but I think you covered that in your response. So in the interest of time and trying to get to people's questions at the end of today, why don't we advance to number 3, please? So I don't want to limit you to 3. Obviously, you guys are in the field and you know how many really serious threats, the ones that are trending or that schools need to be most prepared for. So don't feel limited to 3, but what are the top threats for which school districts and county offices of education should be most prepared?
So I'll kick it off again. This is Mark, and then I'm going to pitch it over to my colleagues here. And I'm going to say high level, and then they can get a little bit more into detail. But in general, the top 3 concerns that we watch pretty much regularly, and we work with school districts throughout the state to prepare for, is obviously a school intruder, active shooter situation. These are conditions that we're seeing more and more of, unfortunately, throughout the state and the country. Wildfire or fire situation, particularly the case of wildfire, where we have seen increasing scope and scale of wildfires over the course of the last probably 8 to 10 years, and the impact on schools and school districts has really been catastrophic in many cases. And of course, earthquake being probably the highest consequence, highest impact event that has the potential to reach a regional impact and damage, and would be very, very detrimental to school operations, notwithstanding the potential of having a safe and secure, structurally safe and secure school, so it protects students and faculty and staff while they're in school, but also the secondary after the earthquake and the impact it has on being able to continue with school operations. Let me pitch it over to Tom and Dawn, and if you want to add anything on particularly the active shooter situation.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. I'll just highlight one of the things that Cal OES is doing on the first bullet we talked about is our concern on seems like the forever increasing attacks within our schools and our school districts. One thing I like to highlight is that Cal OES, and we applied a couple of years ago through a grant administered by the Federal Department of Justice and BJA program called the STOP Grant Program. And we held a pilot within 3 different counties, Orange County, Napa, and San Diego, wherein the goals of this grant is to prevent and reduce school violence. And particularly, looking at the way we can train school personnel and students to prevent violence, develop and operate anonymous reporting systems against the threats of school violence, including mobile telephone application hotlines and websites. And then also, what I think is a really good part of this, as well as the development and operation of school threat assessment and crisis intervention teams, preventing something bad from happening, developing those behavioral assessment teams to predict and help prevent violence occurring within our schools. It was a very successful pilot program of those 3 counties. And we have applied for a much larger grant program by BJA that hopefully will see the benefits in working with the California Department of Education to implement this at a much wider and larger scale throughout the state. So I'll just pause there and turn it to Don if he has anything to add on that.
Yes, thanks, Tom. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here. I think what I would add is cyber to it. And what I'm referring to there is I think you've seen there, especially in the last couple of months, there's been many false reports of active shooter, either via the internet or over the landline, which has caused a lot of disruptions to the school. So I would add cyber to that as well, just because it just throws you out of everything you're doing. It's a false, report, but I mean, we have to treat it as it's real. But I guess what I would come away, I would say, I know that you wanted 1, 2, 3, or at least 3 or 4 of them, but what I think you should think of is all hazards, because really that's what you should be preparing for, and that's where here at OES we can help you with that. Thank you.
Yeah, this Mark, one more time. That is really an important point. So while we in California live in a disaster sort of prone state, it is critical that we do plan in an all hazard environment, right? So that's for both natural disasters and human or man-made disasters. We talked about active shooter. Don mentioned cybersecurity is a major factor for schools and the need to plan for that and prepare. But there's a variety of kinds of threats depending on where the school district is located. You have different kinds of threats, and so it's important to plan accordingly. So using the standardized emergency management system as your baseline for training and education and planning gives the guidance utilizing the partnership with your local county emergency management office and then with state OES to be able to work with your school districts. That then helps you to build a plan that is comprehensive and then helps you to address that all hazard, all risk environment, because you don't know what's going to hit the school, but you want to make sure that you don't focus just on one area of concern. But we have plenty here in California, so we want to do it in a much more broad perspective.
Thank you for that, gentlemen. And for those who came here because they're interested in cybersecurity, we will be addressing that topic more in depth later on in the webinar. So just hold tight and we'll get to that. But we're going to move on to the next question, which is about critical disaster mitigation steps schools can take, particularly ones that are often overlooked. We know every school has a disaster response plan, a school safety plan, but that's basically the bare minimum. It's a legal requirement. What are some additional measures that schools could really take to increase preparedness that you don't see all the time?
Great question. And again, it's something that, given the kind of events that we have seen here, this isn't, something where we sort of will talk about it hadn't occurred. We have seen this time and time again throughout the state where schools are impacted by a number of these kinds of events. So beyond having your baseline emergency plans, trying to work in doing your assessments, finding out what your greatest gaps and weaknesses are, and working to mitigate those potential gaps and weaknesses in advance of a potential disaster are important. This would include things like planning for mass evacuations or student reunification, right? If you had to evacuate the school, if the community had to evacuate, or if, say, for example, your school is in one part of the county and families are working in a different part of the county, how are you going to be able to deal with students and reunification with their parents or family members, et cetera. So that's one area. The other area is planning for students and staff with disabilities or access and functional needs that may be where the school goes into lockdown or there's an evacuation. Your students are separated from their families sometime. If they do have students with AFN needs or other kinds of special needs, having the capability to deal with that. Building communication plans with parents and guardians and your Office of Education and your County Office of Emergency Management, your local police and fire departments. These are relationships that are critical. You don't want to be making the call to 911 at the time of emergency. You want to be doing this at the time in a blue sky period when you have time to plan. You want to build those relationships with each of the schools and these counterparts. And you want to do exercises. Those exercises, it could be tabletop exercises. It could be reviewing of your plans. It could be functional exercises. But it really is critical that you include and incorporate into those exercises and those plans your parents, your PTAs, your school districts, your boards of education, and your community leaders. And I would even go as far as to say your businesses within the communities that the school sits within. That whole of community approach is critical to keeping the school operational. There's a number of other programs. For example, there's the Federal Readiness and Emergency Manager for Schools Technical Assistance Center. This is something that you can get online, and it assists schools in creating a broader emergency operations plans. You can come to Cal OES here. Our State Threat Assessment Center falls under Tom's operation, does vulnerability assessments at school sites to be able to determine where those gaps and risks are, and that helps you to build mitigation plans, but also allows you to potentially apply for mitigation grants. Mitigation grants are available to schools through OES and other agencies to be able to buy down the impacts that could potentially have and make your schools much more resilient to future disasters.
Great. I know our schools will appreciate that. Not everybody was aware of the availability of these grant programs, certainly. So we'll be sure to go offline and get that information from you and send that out to our members so they know exactly where to go so they can check and see if their schools have applied, and if not, they can take advantage of that program. Moving on to question number 5. We've hit on some of these areas, but not all of them. So if you could just outline the 4 areas for which OES has catastrophic response plans.
Well, so we obviously have plans for pretty much, every kind of event that we could possibly see here, but catastrophic response plans. I mean, the question is, what is catastrophic? And I think that one could argue that, there are single events that could be catastrophic for a community. We've seen that in wildfire events where entire towns are lost as a result of wildfire. But when we talk about documents that have done exhaustive planning and we would consider mass catastrophic events, key areas of that are, as I said earlier, highest impact, highest consequence event is a massive earthquake. And so we do have Southern California catastrophic earthquake response plans, which includes all of the Southern California counties from the Mexican border up to roughly Kern County. It is very comprehensive and incorporates all levels of government as well as the private sector. It speaks to everything from supply chain to search and rescue, to fire suppression, to mass evacuations and feeding and housing disaster survivors, et cetera. So that is called the Southern California Catastrophic Earthquake Response Plan. We have a similar plan in the Bay Area. The Bay Area Catastrophic Earthquake Response Plan does the same thing. Unique differences between Southern California and the Bay Area is that the Bay Area has the bay, and we have major cities that are connected by by the bridges. And if the bridges go down, we've had to build in plans around waterborne emergency transportation and being able to utilize other kinds of services to be able to move responders and do evacuations in the event. We also speak in these plans to fire following earthquake, which is a big concern, is that we have conflagration situations after these major events. So the plans speak to that. We also have something called the Cascadia Subduction Zone. This is an earthquake and tsunami response plan. This is for something, the Cascadia Subduction Zone is a fault that starts in and around Mendocino County and goes north up past Oregon and into Canada. It is a subduction zone fault, which means that unlike the San Andreas fault, which slides past itself, this is a fault system that actually you can have an upthrust and the bottom falls out, and that's why it can create a tsunami as well as the earthquake. The tsunami obviously comes with its own set of challenges and requires a much more elaborate set of plans to be able to deal with the tsunami. And a lot of this is built around alert and warning, and of course, all the pre-event training that goes along with that so that people know where to go in the event that the tsunami alert system gets activated. And then the last one that I'll just mention is the Northern California Catastrophic Flood Response Plan. This is even though we've been in a drought for a number of years, California has historically, particularly the central part of the state, is historically a high risk for flood, and we've seen catastrophic floods here many years in the past. And so having that catastrophic flood plan in place is critical. School districts should be aware of what the county involvement is in these plans, and talk to the counties about how they've built their plans around it. And as I mentioned, these plans take a whole of community. It's not something that we want school districts to wait on. We want you to be engaged now and understand what that means, because sometimes schools, if they're not directly impacted, could be evacuation centers or areas of refuge for evacuees, or used as command centers. But or they could be impacted directly by the disaster, and we have to be thinking about where we're going to reconstitute school operations in a safe and secure environment. So there's a lot associated with this. Tremendous amount of work is done on this area, but it is something to know that it's in place, and we encourage you to ask questions. And you can also go to our website at caloes.ca.gov to learn more about these plans, and also learn more about mitigation, all the things we're talking about today, grants, etc., on that website.
Thank you, Mark. We are now going to talk about another aspect of disaster preparedness and response, and that's sort of the community engagement aspect. We focused a lot on what the school district itself can do, but full preparedness is a community-wide matter. So what are some of the best practices a school district can share or encourage among students, parents, staff, and community, so the wider area, the wider region is best prepared for the different situations that could arise?
Okay. Well, I mean, I mentioned a few of these already. School districts really need to incorporate all of their staff, their teachers, their students, their parents, guardians, etc., and get to know their first responders in their community, their fire and law enforcement, their emergency management. It's important to understand, what services are made available. What we encourage you to do is we encourage you to each school to reach out to their local fire department or their local emergency management office and ask them to come to the school and brief you on the plans that are in place, and then talk with you about how best the school and the school family can get engaged in the overall planning. This could be everything from just doing briefings to parent groups, to students, faculty, and staff, but also setting up exercises, reviewing your plans, making sure your plans are up to speed, and then making sure that what we do these exercises, both tabletop or functional exercises, so that people understand what's going to happen during an emergency. These situations where it used to be where, you kind of plan for this and hope for the best is not the case anymore. We are seeing a tremendous increase in the scope and scale and complexity of disasters and emergencies. Are hitting more frequently. Climate-related events are accelerating the pace at which we're seeing these events. More schools and school districts are impacted by these events throughout the state. And if the weather patterns and the climate-related challenges aren't enough, the earthquake's always looming. And then, of course, we unfortunately have these cases where we're having intruder alerts or active shooters that are taking place. So much like any community, the school community needs to prepare for the inevitable event that may be there. And that also provides you and your students and your faculty and your staff and your parents with an empowerment to understand what to do, what's going to happen, what is the plan, and how everybody plays a role in that, so that it's not chaotic at the time of emergency. Also recommend, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, does have some resources. You can go to ready.gov, which is a good source. Cal OES here has the Cal OES Preparedness Ambassador Program. This is a disaster program for California's fourth graders, and it's a program designed to engage fourth grade students to develop and promote their disaster preparedness guidelines for their homes, their schools, their local communities. It's really a first statewide classroom preparedness program where we work with the Department of Education, where we're using real world case studies, and it's been really successful to this point. Local emergency operations plans, I mentioned those. Review your local hazard mitigation plans. Understand where the school is located. What threats exist around your school? Are you in a floodplain? Are you on an earthquake fault? Are you in a wildfire area? Is your school, have enough security in place? Have you done the work to harden the school to the degree that by procedure or policy or physical enhancements to make the school as safe and secure as possible? So you want to review your school's comprehensive school safety plans and ensure that they're current. And if you need training, please reach out to us or reach out to your local fire department, law enforcement agency, or emergency management. And there are, if you go to FEMA's website or you go to OES website, there are trainings available for individuals, teachers and staff and administrators to be able to take some courses that are baseline in emergency management, just so that you understand that interface, that handoff, that handshake that takes place between you all and your local responders when they get on scene, so that it really buys down that time when you're trying to figure out who's doing what and how you're doing it. You want to try to build those relationships far in advance.
Thank you. The next question involves using schools as shelter sites. I think there's a general awareness amongst the people on this webinar that schools can be used for shelter sites in the event of a disaster, but I've had conversations with members who were surprised when disaster did strike about how fast that moved and the scope of schools being used or converted to shelter sites. So can you talk about the implications of that and what it can look like operationally when there is a big disaster and schools are being converted for that purpose?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned a couple things that we do have the authority to utilize schools, and it's also in the education code, and it's in our statute under the Emergency Services Act, that in the event of an emergency where a school could be utilized, as I mentioned, as a area of refuge. It could be utilized as a evacuation point, emergency shelter, or a command center in the event that it's needed to help mitigate the response to a particular emergency in the area. this is, you know, we've had times where Red Cross has used schools. And, you know, we map pretty much all the schools within the state. We know their capacity, where what could be utilized for what kind of event. If it can be utilized for a shelter site, or if it can be utilized for the ability for a command center. The fact is that there's internet typically there. There are typically showers and bathrooms and at times feeding capabilities. So they again, like as I mentioned earlier, these communities, the school is a community, and it's one of those things that we do balance off what the impact to the school is. We typically wouldn't do something where, you know, if there's an emergency in the area, if it doesn't include that particular school district, that we would empty that school and utilize it as a shelter. But, you know, in the event that it is in the disaster area and that it is safe and secure, it could be utilized for emergency shelter. It could be utilized for that. But we are sensitive to the impacts on the school, and we're sensitive to the fact that when we're using a school, we want to use it as for the minimal time as we can in the event that we want to get kids back in the school, and we want to get that whole program going again. So it's a balance, and it's a conversation and communication coordination that takes place with the school district and the County Board of Education, or at times the State Department of Education, to be able to coordinate all of that with the respective school. But it is not uncommon. It can happen very fast, and if you know at times there's a need to bring in additional resources. We've got the capability through various sources and means to bring enhanced capabilities that could turn that school into a broader community of resources to be able to utilize as a larger command center if it's strategically located and it's something that we need to be able to mitigate the emergency. Then we can do that.
Great, thank you. At the outset of today's webinar, we talked about the 3 R's of disaster preparation: the readiness, response, and recovery. We've touched on each of those areas a little bit, but just wanted to explore the recovery part a little bit more. I think districts tend to be a little bit stronger in terms of disaster readiness and that initial response, but maybe haven't done as much work on the recovery phase. So what is the benefit of having a strong recovery plan?
So probably one of the, I mean, we're talking about a lot of very, very important things today. And this one is just like at the top of the list as well. And that is having a school and a district have a disaster recovery plan that speaks to how you're going to address the continuity of operations of that school, how you're going to be able to rapidly recover from a particular disaster. What are the needs going to be for your students, faculty, and staff? Where would you go in the event that your school's not operational? What would the backup plan be for your continuity of operations? In the event of loss of infrastructure, in other words, damage due to fire or earthquake or some other event, how are who are you going to contact, right? You again, this is about relationships and understanding. So your disaster recovery plan really is something that it is a whole of community. But we want to make sure that you know that not all disasters are automatically FEMA disasters. Many of the disasters that hit are at state level, and the state has programs for disaster recovery that are different than, or in some cases similar to, what FEMA provides. And so understanding that, and again, it's an opportunity for you to work with your local emergency management office, or here at Cal OES, or the California Department of Education has now built a pretty robust emergency management capability. But to understand that the recovery plan has to have that kind of resource information. You need to understand that there are key things like the funding. How do you stay operational afloat in the event that your school is shut down for a long period of time? Now, all of us have just recently come through COVID, which was a unique, very, very impactful event over the course of a long period of time that required us to all utilize different sorts of modes and methods to be able to address the school operations, right? In that case, it was the sort of the extreme of continuity by which you went to distance learning and other kinds of operational constructs. But it could be something where you have had a fire and all of the school or part of the school is burned down, right? It's going to be important to clear the debris out as fast as we possibly can, taking into account the hazardous materials and the other kinds of factors. But we want to get that school site cleaned up sooner rather than later so that we can get the rebuilding started. And in the interim, working with the state and or our partners at FEMA, we can work to put in temporary school sites and temporary shelters to be able to make sure that your continuity of school operations continues. So that speaks into the recovery plan as well. So it's funding, it's debris management, it's infrastructure needs, and then whatever technical assistance may be necessary. You know, we have done everything from working with you in your recovery plan from housing students and staff and you know, it's very difficult at times to you know, move students and staff miles away outside of the district that they operate in typically, but because the disaster is of such nature, you can't get back in, then we will coordinate to work with maybe leasing another facility or working with a different school district to absorb those students in a coordinated fashion. Those disaster recovery plans also speak to the authorities that exist at the state that can support all of you. Because you're special districts, you are subject to the support of the state through the California Disaster Assistance Act that provides funding and resources, but also gives you the ability to request federal assistance should the criteria be met and that you fall within that category. And then your disaster recovery plan also talks about how to do damage assessment, right? To be able to get a better sense of what needs you have, those damage assessments are very, very critical. And working with your local officials and with my office, State OES, doing a rapid damage assessment and with our Department of Education, that team working with you all can help determine really what your needs are going to be. The key thing is that this should be reflected in your recovery plan. And that's for really the physical disaster. The other piece of your recovery plan, which I think we're going to talk about in a minute, is your cyber recovery plan. Cybersecurity is a factor we're going to talk about, but it is something that having a disaster recovery plan for IT and cyber intrusions is just as critical as the having a recovery plan for something like from a natural disaster like earthquake or wildfire.
Thank you. I think that will help a lot and really impress upon people the importance of having a strong disaster recovery plan, not just the immediate response. So the next question we've touched on lightly before, but if we could just go a little bit deeper on what OES can provide in terms of transportation and evacuation services. A lot of districts these days don't have robust school busing programs or other assets that you might use in transportation or evacuation. So if you could talk about how OES can help if there is a need for that.
Sure. So, you know, generally evacuations, when there's an evacuation that's going to take place, evacuations are typically done at the local level. They're done, you know, the incident command who's managing the particular incident at that area will call for evacuations, and then we'll determine where the evacuees will go, where the students may go. They'll go to a place of refuge or a safe zone, or get, you know, in essence, get out of the immediate threat area. Part of your response plans should include an annex associated with transportation. So that's, you know, utilizing your bus delivery system if you have one in place, and if you don't have one in place, coordinating with your county officer of emergency management about utilization of city service buses, or other means of large number of transportation for evacuating large numbers of people. The way that operations work here, as I mentioned, there's our standardized emergency management system. Disasters are local, so that's being facilitated at the local level. But the local authorities at the operational area or the county are requesting up through the region. The requests for assistance rapidly come here to state OES. In the event that a county does not have the physical resources like buses or other transportation means to be able to provide that evacuation in a systematic and safe way, they can turn to us and make a request, and we of course can task either buses from other school districts to come in and support you, or we could get buses from other entities, other city buses, or we can go to the private sector and be able to coordinate support for buses. Now, I mentioned buses in the context of you're having to move large people, but evacuations come in all different sorts and sizes, and it may be that it's not transportation is necessary, or it may be a different kind of transportation. As it becomes more complex or more specific, we have everything in the availability from aircraft to vessels in the event in a flooding situation to get people moved. But it would all be in support of local authorities and the folks that are on the ground there in the front of the disaster or emergency, determining what the needs are, and we can build around capabilities to support that accordingly.
Great. If we can move on to the next question. I think we've covered this fairly thoroughly, what services OES can offer for post-disaster recovery. Is there anything else you'd want to add?
Well, post-disaster recovery, again, this is an area that is, you really need to understand it, because there's a lot of complexity to post-disaster recovery, right? It depends upon the impacts that the school has faced. Each particular disaster has its own series of challenges. If it's an earthquake, it's going to be a different kind of recovery than a wildfire. In a wildfire, where you potentially could have lost all of the school or part of the school, where it's all consumed, that's one thing. If it's an earthquake where it's partially damaged or cracked, you can have a different kind of recovery, but it has to be secure and safe to be able to get and reconstitute and get students back in. So there's a lot of engineering and assessments that are done during the recovery. Funding is a huge issue of part of this, right? I mean, we have to ensure that the school district has the money to continue to operate, and that is a key function of what we do we have a whole directorate here at OES that is dedicated to recovery operations, and at any one time throughout California, they're managing multi-billions of dollars in recovery operations from multiple disasters over the course of the last several years. It's important to note that disaster recovery is a marathon, not a sprint, and that it is something that is methodical, and depending on how catastrophic the event is, if you've lost all of the school or all of the buildings, it will take some time to get that rebuilt. So we're going to want to look at temporary facilities or temporary capabilities. Our goal is to get you back operational as fast as we possibly can, and we're going to utilize all of our means and methods, including being a pipeline to the federal government, to the U.S. Department of Education, to FEMA, or to other areas of the federal government that can provide additional support to you. Our key contact between OES is the FEMA. FEMA has the broad sense of being able to go to the other federal family to be able to bring in support. And then lastly, I'll just say, I can't underscore enough the importance as part of your recovery plan to build a whole of government, whole of community capability. Know your business leaders, know your hospital leaders, know your first responders, have an interaction between your parent-teacher association, your administration, and these members of your community. We have seen time and time again that businesses stepping up to help schools be able to get over the hump of these events. Very, very important. And so we really encourage the recovery plans to be part of that. And if you have questions about your recovery plan, again, your local emergency management office or come to OES here. Our website has a lot about recovery planning, but we also just make contact with us. Happy to work with you on what would be necessary to address your recovery plan.
Great. We're going to shift gears now and talk about cybersecurity. This is an issue that's on people's radar because of the recent incident at Los Angeles Unified School District, but it's been a concern for a while. And it's not just districts like LAUSD, large districts that are impacted. It's really a risk to county offices of education and school districts throughout the state. So could you please discuss what you see as the largest cybersecurity related threats for public schools?
I'm going to pass it over to Tom.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, so number one of the risk to the education sector is relatively higher than other sectors, largely because it's an underfunded mandate on cybersecurity. So as a result, your increasing cyber risk is escalated because maybe not the most robust cybersecurity practices, protocols, trainings are in place due to the funding issue. So I think that's the top level setting. However, when it comes to that, then the biggest threat we see in the education sector is from cyber criminal actors, cyber actors who are motivated via the dollar, the ransomware, malware that infects systems. They're looking for a payout. And as a result of a higher risk from a cybersecurity perspective, perhaps these different vulnerabilities that are out in the wild aren't getting patched in a timely fashion. And as a result, these bad actors are exploiting these unpatched systems and locking systems down, making them inoperable, and wanting to get paid to make them, operable again. Providing the decryption key, if you will, to bring your systems back online. So the cyber criminal actors certainly is your biggest threat. What we've seen in 2021 is a 127% increase in all cyber ransomware actors. In particular, the education sector increased 11% just in the first half of 2022. So this particular threat against the education sector is certainly increasing in complexity and diversification of the threats that we face. I think it, as everybody knows, once excuse me, a cyber actor takes a foothold into your system, not only does it disrupt just what you do from a daily basis, but sensitive data from your students and from your teachers are also vulnerable to be exploited to be further exploited, on the dark web and leveraging PII and the like, where they're using people's credits to, again, promote their financial means. Additionally, the reporting on cyber incidents for education sector has been an underreported entity, if you will. Just most recently, AB 2355 was passed, which now mandates the reporting of cyber incidents to the CalSIC, which is our center here, the California Cybersecurity Integration Center. So with this new data coming inbound, we might be able to paint a much better picture of the threats that face the education sector. Right now, it's a little bit piecemeal. So I'll pause on that from that.
So we'll move to the next question, having covered what some of the threats are. What are some of the services that OES provides around security prevention and response in the case of a cybersecurity incident?
Right. Yeah. So I'll point to our California Cybersecurity Integration Center. It was formed in 2015 under an executive order by the governor, codified into law in 2018. And it's the central coordinating component of all cyber-related activities for the state of California. So to protect its critical infrastructure, all the education, all the sectors, it's that coordinating component. So within the CalSIC, there are many, many different services that are directly applicable to what we're talking about today. I'll talk about a few things. One is being from our cyber threat intelligence distribution. So our goal within the center is preventing cyber attacks from occurring. And how do you do that? You share cyber threat intelligence. You share the most critical vulnerabilities that have just been detected by the community experts. We are blessed to have the highest brain power in the world here in Silicon Valley and leveraging those technologies and these vulnerabilities and distributing that. So folks can sign up to our morning reports, so they can receive, real-time data and access to what's happening today. We can also publish, and we do publish, and you can get on these distribution lists or cyber advisories and bulletins. And what we attempt to do is be really surgical in our approach on these documents so that you're reading something that is really specific to the education sector versus another sector that may not be applicable to you. We also coordinate cyber incident response. So should your district become attacked by a cyber actor, you can call us and we will leverage our resources and our partner resources to help you out and assist from the beginning. Also, the left of boom from the cyber attacks, we can conduct vulnerability scanning, threat assessments to see what's the state of your network, what's the health of your network, and provide prescriptive recipes to best protect you and your networks.
Great. I think our members will be really happy to hear that. I know there's been a lot of concern since the LAUSD incident generated headlines, and I don't think there was that level of familiarity that you do have such a robust suite of services to respond. So that's something people will definitely be taking advantage of. I believe that was our last scripted question. So why don't we move along to some of the questions that our members have submitted. The first one is there a state-supported anonymous reporting system? So if you could speak to that.
I can pick that up, boss. So from not so much the cyber component, but there is. So through our fusion centers, there's a fusion center network that we also are part of. It's called the State Threat Assessment System. 6 centers, one system wherein you can submit anonymous tips to these fusion centers, and it can be reported anonymous, and they will follow up with them. It will go to intelligence analysts. It will go to the appropriate law enforcement officials if the threat rises to that level of threshold. And also if it comes into more of a federal criminal response, it would be referred to the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force. So there's a network in place. It's, everybody would be familiar with this, the see something, say something. That would be the reporting mechanism anonymously, should you choose, or you can call those centers directly and talk to somebody live, but that is one method in this particular area.
Thank you. That's good to note. The next question is multi-part. It's a little bit complicated, but I will try to break it down. This member says that they sense that there is somewhat conflicting direction from local first responders in terms of law enforcement versus the fire department on how evacuations should be conducted. Their impression is that law enforcement are primarily concerned with violent intruders and active shooters, and suggest that students and staff in schools don't evacuate at the sound of the emergency bells unless they see or smell fire. However, they're saying that the local fire department officials state that California Fire Code requires all persons to evacuate immediately at the sound of the emergency bells, even if they don't see other or smell other sounds of a fire. So I don't know if you agree with that assessment, but how would you respond to that? And what advice would you give to teachers or other people at school sites? Should they evacuate immediately or wait until they see or smell smoke or fire?
You want me to start for that one, or you want to?
Yeah, no, it's Don here. I think what I would think there is in advance, working with your local fire and law enforcement and schools to come up with a plan for when this happens. I think that my first thought on this is that you got to go with what your local emergency responders are telling you to do. But I think that there's equity in trying to sit down in advance, talk about it, talk over the scenarios with fire and law present. And so there's no misunderstanding when it does happen. But I guess at the end of the day, it's, when the incident happens and people are told to evacuate, then it should be done in orderly fashion.
Yeah, this is Mark. I want to add. So historically, the fire department has the assessment on the fire departments is correct. The truth of the matter is that the active shooter scenarios have thrown a different complexity into the traditional time to evacuate or not evacuate. And Dawn is 100% correct. This is one of those areas where it is critical, absolutely critical, that you get with your fire and law enforcement at your city or county level and have this discussion with them, with the sheriff, with the police chief, with the fire chief, all at the same time, and sitting with you to come up with an understanding about what's going to happen. And really what'll happen is that under 99% of the circumstances, it probably will be with the fire departments because it's based upon, you know, historical events that we've known and we've built around. But there's going to be one of those times where that's not going to be the case. And if it's an active shooter or an intruder kind of situation. And so you need to have an override or, you know, an understanding should something happen other than that, that norm that is in place, that you've got procedures to be able to handle it. This is interestingly enough, and over the dinner conversation I've had with my wife, who's a school teacher, because their school had a similar conundrum with regards to fire and law enforcement and you know, even, you know, when you're out on the schoolyard or if you're in the classroom, you know, do you run out of the schoolyard, do you run into the classroom? So really, again, there's no linear pathway to a lot of these things, but it is something that really requires that coordination and communication. And I really encourage all the schools and districts that are on here to schedule that meeting with your fire and law enforcement at all the same time so that they can have a conversation about what is the best procedure for your particular district.
And if I may, Director, also I have the privilege of excuse me, representing the director at this California State Sheriff's Association and the California Police Chiefs Association. And I have brought this issue up since our initial meeting with the superintendent to, you know, remind the chiefs and sheriffs that, you know, one of their constituents are the schools, and that they should have real close working relationships. Some are better than others. And I have staff in the field that can assist with those relationships. If there, let's say, is a department, police or sheriff's department that may not be engaging, you know, we certainly can reach out and try to, you know, to assist with getting a better communication between the agencies.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I don't believe there are any further questions. So if nothing pops up in the next 10 or 15 seconds, we'll begin the conclusion of this webinar. If you would just display the screen with contact information, please. So that's the contact information for csba.org. If you'd like to reach out to OES directly, we can provide you with contact information, so don't hesitate to do that. Also, the OES website is caloes.ca.gov. Again, that's caloes.ca.gov, or of course, you can just Google California Office of Emergency Services. Very rich website with a lot of information. I can't recommend it enough. School board members and the staff who are responsible for emergency response, PIOs, risk management people, anybody on that level, school site principals, of course, and admins, and teachers, everyone really should view that and have at least some familiarity with the resources there. We also have a school safety webpage on the CSBA website, which we are in the process of revamping and enhancing. But don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions. Everybody who registered for today's webinar will receive both a link to this recording as well as some of the slides. So I thank everybody who's watching live, and to those of us who are watching later, I hope you find some useful information and do your best on the 3 R's related to crisis at schools: readiness, response, and recovery. Thank you and good day.